And the rest of you. There's not much more fun than watching kids. It's a good thing. So the rest of us, we're going to be in Mark chapter 4 today. We're going to look at the end of Mark chapter 4 and the beginning of Mark chapter 5. And so if you want to turn there, that's a good thing. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is Jesus. And I'd like for us to all think about who Jesus is and understand where the disciples were and what they were thinking and what they were doing and understanding who we are. And I had written out this sermon because it's my job. That's one. And two, because it really helped me to learn some things this week. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that where suddenly things clicked and it made sense and you went, oh, I can't wait. I need to tell you about this. I really need to tell you about this. And that's the way I feel today. I feel like there's a lot of things I could do, but this is the best I could do. And I recognize what it's like outside today. When I got up and I went outside today, I thought, this is the greatest spring day I can remember. There was no clouds, it was beautiful, and when I came back just a little bit ago, there was this big white puffy cloud over there, and it was beautiful, and I thought, this is a great day to talk about storms. It made no sense. Last week it would have made sense because out of nowhere that storm came up and there was clouds and then there was lightning and then there was thunder and then there was hail and it was apocalyptic. Everything was just going all at the same time. And then somebody had the great idea to shoot a gun outside our house, and that was even more fun because then we got to hear the police come. It was a great time. And that's what storms are like. Storms just come out of nowhere. And they just bop you in the head. And I was trying to think if our favorite weatherman had predicted the storm that night. And I don't remember because I wasn't watching TV, or at least not at Weather Channel. But sometimes storms come. Sometimes storms come that we just aren't looking for. Sometimes storms are financial. Sometimes you get laid off, or sometimes you get just big bills that come out of nowhere and you think, how could that be? I checked on that, that couldn't be. And how did that happen? And then there are some storms that are emotional. The people who love you until they don't. Maybe that's just me. Everything's okay, always, until it's not. Have you noticed that? That's what a storm was like. Storms come sometimes in your family, and sometimes in your health, and sometimes in your job, and sometimes other people's jobs and other people's needs get in the way, and they want to tell you about it because they're going through bad things, and you're thinking, everything's great until you hear that. And then it's not. And then there's the whole situation with Jesus. The whole situation centers around a lake this time. And for us, lakes don't make any sense in the desert, do they? But for me, my dream home was on a lake. And Marcy and I got married and we moved into clearly it wasn't our dream home, but we moved into a house on a lake, and it was great until it was winter and there was no insulation in Minnesota. So it was great to live on a lake, and we got to see the lake come up and do all sorts of things, and then we got to see the ice go over our dock that I forgot to take out because I was too busy, and then it was just wonderful until it wasn't. Lakes are like that. And so you have to recognize where you are and where you live. And for many of us, we don't recognize the volatility of the place we're in until we're in it. And then it becomes overwhelming. I just kind of push rewind on that a little bit. You don't realize the volatility of the place you're in until you're in it. And it works like that. And babies crying is okay. I don't mind, because actually this week it's been me that was crying and not babies, and that's the way that works. So I want you to remember how Jesus taught. Jesus used a lot of things. He taught small groups, and he's taught big groups, and he taught individuals, and he taught in many different places, and he used all sorts of illustrations. But I think you need to remember, the thing that was most impressive with Jesus was that when he would talk right to the person. He'd look them right in the eye. And he'd spend time on their needs and on their stuff. And it wasn't just about all the general things in the day, it was about them. And Jesus did things on purpose. And the point too there is the message of Jesus is better understood when time with Jesus is increased. Do you know that's true? What I could do is ask you to raise your hand if you know that's true. And then some of you would go, boy, I really don't like this sermon at all. How long before we get out of here? Because that's the way it works. It's personal. The more time you spend with Jesus, the better you get to know him. The less time you spend with Jesus, the less you know him. And then you can become more callous and you can say, yeah, that church stuff is great for you. But clearly you're here today on purpose. And I want you to know, I've been praying for everybody that's here today that you would be drawn here on purpose. And those who are not here, boy, they're missing it. So when you leave and you see them later, you go, oh boy, you missed that. Because we saw God show up. And that's the goal of today. Is it not that you'd listen to me, or not that you'd sing, or not that you'd take communion, but that God would show up in your life. And things would be different. Because of this day, because of this moment, because of what's happening right now. Because all the things that go on are on purpose. And God gives us memories on purpose. And he gives us situations on purpose. And he causes things to happen that will snap you out of your doldrums, out of the calmness of your lake, and help you to understand. Because as we're looking at Mark chapter 4 and then chapter 5, we're going to see that Jesus does stuff really very specifically. So we're going to look at Jesus in the very, very busy day. And so what happened is you can see Jesus up there in the corner. Mike told me to get this pointer, and I should. Because I'll be the teacher guy right now. So this is a representation of Jesus. And he's going to go all the way across here on purpose. And you might not like his purpose, because I'm pretty sure the disciples didn't like his purpose, but he went there on purpose anyway, and he did it for them. So let's read in Mark chapter 4, verse 35. It says, that day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. And there were other boats also with him. See, Jesus was going to use the lake as a buffer between him and all the other people. And that's what the disciples thought. They thought, oh, this is good. We're going to go alone. It's going to be great alone time with God. This is so cool. This is all about Jesus. And Jesus went across the lake. And I'll show you that again. Unless you've read this before, you got to remember, this isn't very far. And it was at night. And it's really calm at night, except when it's not. So let's keep going on here. Do you know that people matter to God? Do you know that? It says so here in my notes. And my notes are in the back because I'm not smart enough to remember everything. So if I miss something and you find it in the notes, you'll find that it's there. It's better in the notes. But people matter to God. Do you always remember that? Do you remember that God cares about you in every single circumstance, every single time? Because today we know he does, because it is so beautiful outside. Today you could just have, this is a kind of day there'd be rainbows with no rain. It's just that nice. Until it's not. But Jesus always moves with purpose in his intent. He always goes someplace on purpose. He knows that it's going to be good wherever Jesus is. Because we know that, right? Wherever Jesus is, it's good. And Jesus always affects our life. Now, when I was learning English, there's two effects. One is the effects, where things happen to you and it hits you. And the other is affects, where it hits you. So Jesus, he always affects you. He's always doing something around you. And he's always affecting you. There's stuff that goes on that makes a difference. And all of life seems good. But sometimes life seems overwhelming. And that's when storms happen. So as we're reading on in verse 37, it says, a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Did they know that was going to happen when they got in the boat? Did they think it was going to happen? Because wherever Jesus is, it's good. That's about as happy sounding as I can be. Because wherever Jesus is, it's good. But what if Jesus is asleep in your boat? None of you have ever had that happen, right? None of you have been just sailing along and then all of a sudden a furious squall comes up, which means it's a really, really big deal. And what I was going to do if I had a great memory, I was going to bring, and I told my Sunday school class I wouldn't say the same thing over again, but I'm going to anyway because I think it's a great illustration. What if you had a fish bowl and you had one little fish in it and you were carrying it and everything looked easy and good, and then you tripped, and what would happen to the fish inside the fish bowl? That's what it's like, isn't it? Your life just gets out of control, and I know Francis said it was murky, or Francis or Joni, because they were sitting real close together, and they're nice friends, so I don't know which one was which, but that's the way it works. Life gets murky, and it gets splashy, and things are hard, and where's Jesus then? He's asleep in the back of the boat. None of you have ever felt that, right? Your life's never gotten out of control. You've never had a financial storm where you just went, that would be great if we could pay for it. You've never had an emotional thing where somebody just dropped you on your head with a word or two, and sometimes that happens on purpose, and that's when I really don't like it. I really don't like when people do stuff on purpose. And if you've ever been around a storm, you know that storms leave scars because there's always tree branches down, aren't there? There's always stuff that's remainder from that. And scars are left sometimes on people. Remember that effect and that affect? That's the way that works. You can have a really good shield and everything's good and tell it's not. And when people hurt you on purpose, ooh, that's a great thing, isn't it? Don't you just love it when people hurt you on purpose and they leave a scar? No, I could show you. No, I won't do that. I got scars, and I've got scars that show up, and I've got scars that don't show up. And most of us have scars that we don't want other people to see because they're left by people. And sometimes scars are left intentionally, and sometimes scars happen unintentionally, like they just didn't mean to do it, but it happens anyway. And somehow it seems, this is my response, people come to me and say, you're a pastor, why do bad things happen? It must be sin. And I say, yeah, that's probably true. Well, what sin caused this to happen? I don't know. I really don't know, because all bad things are consequences of sin, but is it this person's fault, or is it that person's fault, or is it the fault that they got caught, or is it why? Because sometimes storms aren't caused by personal sin. Sometimes your life is not affected by your stuff. Sometimes it's other people's stuff. And sometimes it's other people's choices. And sometimes things happen. And storms sometimes are just simply storms, but storms always lead to a change. It's always different. In the middle of the storm, after the storm, it's always different. And there are some reactions that people have. So this is a counseling session, in case you were wondering. This is how counseling works. Because I read one time that you're supposed to counsel from the pulpit. What happens sometimes is there are reactions to storms, and sometimes people isolate. You know what isolate means? It means to withdraw. It means to say, leave me alone. I can work it out. I can take care of myself. And then we become self-sufficient, we become cocooned, and we stay away from everybody, because you know what? That's the good way to work it. Because if you're really stoic, that'll help. But storms don't go away just because you're in isolation. That's the second half. So wherever Jesus is, it's good, right? Unless you pull away. The second thing that happens is you can complain. None of you have ever complained. I know that's true. Just me. I'm the one who complains, and my wife is so close to perfect sometimes I can't believe it. Because she puts up with me when I say, oh, that hurts. I don't want that anymore. Can you just make that go away? And she just smiles for a long time. So the complaint is that, how did you let this happen to me? That's what we sometimes say to Jesus. How did you let this happen to me? And I think that's what was going on in that boat. They're waking up Jesus and they're going, hey, you're the Son of God, right? That's what you said. How come there's this storm? And then the one I really like is, I told you this would happen. Have you ever had somebody do that to you? That's like slicing you with a big old knife, isn't it? I told you this would happen. If you keep going this way, this is what's going to work out. So then you get Job's friends, don't you? So you can isolate, you can complain, or you can blame somebody else. You can wait it out and you say, this too will pass, which is a funny, funny statement to me. Because not everything passes. Sometimes they have to go get stuff that bothers you. It's true. And sometimes in the middle of what you're doing when you're waiting it out, you're not really waiting it out. What you're doing is all those things above. You're isolating and you're complaining and you're withdrawing and you're saying, it'll all be okay. It ain't. Because storms are storms. But there's one more thing. You can draw close. And that's the one that really comes in last place most times, is that we can draw close to God. And you can say, I'm so glad you never left me. And this is what I say, because there's a comma in my notes. It says, I know I was a jerk when I was in pain. I know that about me. And I know that about storms. But Jesus never leaves us. And we have to remember that storms can bring out the best and the worst in us. But if we rely on Jesus, it's going to be okay. We have to remember that Jesus is in control of every single situation, and He will use it for His glory, which is why it's so odd that today, when I want to talk about storms, there's no illustration outside at all. It is the brightest, most beautiful day ever. So why in the world would God use today to remind you about storms and remind you that Jesus is in the boat? Because the disciples asked, and I look at it over and over again, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? The question of the disciples is fair, isn't it? You're the God of all creation, right? How come we're in this mess? How did you let this happen? You're supposed to be our rock and our comforter. Why now? Why did this happen now? Don't you care? And my question that's not in the text, because I've often wondered it, because I read this over and over again, what about those other boats? The ones who were following after Jesus. They didn't have Jesus in their boat. What happened to them? Maybe you don't want to think about that. Because for us, we have Jesus in the boat. But those guys who didn't have Jesus in the boat, and they were watching this storm, and they were in the middle of this storm, man, that must have been terrifying for them. At least the disciples could say, hey, Jesus. And Jesus would wake up and say, verse 39, He got up and He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, quiet, be still. And then the wind died down and it was completely calm, and He said to His disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Wow. I'm really glad Jesus doesn't talk to me that way. Why do you have so little faith? He can take care of all of the situations all around us, but the last line there, that's the hard one. Why are you so afraid? Where did you think I went? See, they were in a place that was really, really like home for them. They were out on a lake, and they knew the lake, and they knew all about the lake, and they were at home and at peace with the lake, and then the lake wasn't the lake. The lake was a storm. So when Jesus said, peace, be still, it was different. Because creation listens to its master. Get that part? I mean, this was really difficult for me because I learned so much this week and I really didn't want to learn it. Maybe that's the way you are sometimes. Maybe you don't want to learn it, and then Jesus comes along and says, hey, guess what? You get to learn this week. And everybody jumps for joy, right? Not the disciples. They were terrified and they asked each other, who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey Him. And the disciples with Him in the boat were probably questioning what they had gotten themselves into. It wasn't just simple fear of a little pain, because I'm really afraid of pain. I don't like it anymore. I'm sick and tired of it. But it wasn't just a little pain. Their lives were in danger, and they were flat out amazed that Jesus was doing all these things. And maybe they were in greater fear because of what Jesus had done in calming the storm. That's where I turned on this lesson. And I wondered, what does this mean? And this is the line that I understood it to be the best, is that Jesus is exactly where He needs to be and says exactly the right thing. So wherever you are And you can just put this in your pocket for later. Remember that Jesus is in the exact right place, and he says the exact right thing at the exact right time, because that is the safest place on earth. And there have been times when people have said to me, why are you going to this country or that country? Don't you know how unsafe it is? That doesn't matter. It's like Jesus is in the back of the boat. I don't care. Yeah, I've seen machetes up close to where they could shave me. I've seen Uzis in my eyeballs. I've had all that fun stuff, but I didn't worry. And it's so stupid. I am dumb that way. I had a guy hold a machete to my neck, and he said, so where's your God now? And I just stood there and went, I guess it'll be okay. How dumb is that? But at that moment, I was trusting God. But there are other moments when I said, wake up! I'm in the boat too. Maybe that's just for me this week. Maybe I just learned that for myself. Because then the thing I had to learn was real storms happen, and real financial crises happen. And sometimes we need God's blessing, and we need it right now. So it just so happened, that's the coincidences of the week, is that we started a staff Bible study this week on Psalms, and the first one is Psalm 1, and so we're learning about what it means to be blessed. And I learned something that I always knew intellectually, and I've written notes in my Bible, and I have all this thing in here, but I didn't get it. I just didn't get it until I needed it. So this is what Psalm 1 says. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. And I've read this over and over again, lots and lots of times. And we've had kids come up right here and hold the microphone and recite Psalm 1 and do it beautifully. And we all clapped and we thought, that's great. And still the question to me is, what's blessed? Blessed is the one. Blessed for the author. So that's kind of the way I look at it. David is the author, and David is in the exact position God desires his listener to be, in the center of his will. And that's what it means to be blessed. And so in the New Testament we hear blessed, it means happy, because when we read the King James Version, is happy is the man. So I didn't understand it. So for us to be under God's blessing, to be in the boat with God, is to be happy in doing what we're doing and where we are placed. It is doing what is morally justified and right and what is deserved, even when it's hard, or even when it seems to be that God has walked away. Wow. I never thought of it that way. Have you ever understood that when you're blessed, it's not that you get a pile of stuff? It's that you're exactly where God wants you to be, doing exactly what he wants you to do? I read this article by a woman on the desiringgod.com website, and she writes, earthly blessings are temporary, they can all be taken away. Job's blessings were all taken away on one day. And then she writes her story, so I'm going to just read her story so you can imagine her, not me, reading this. I too had a comfortable life that was stripped away within a span of weeks. My marriage dissolved, my children rebelled, my health spiraled downward, my family fell apart, my dreams were shattered, and yet in the midst of those painful events, I experienced God's richest blessings. A stronger faith than I had experienced before. A deeper love than I had ever known. A more intimate walk than I could explain. My trials grounded my faith in ways that prosperity and abundance never could. While my trials were not blessings in themselves, they were channels for them. As Laura Story writes in her song, Blessings, what if your blessings came through raindrops? What if trials of this life, the rain and the storms and the hardest nights, are your mercies in disguise? That's what I needed. And maybe you didn't need that, but I'm going to tell you anyway. When we look at the New Testament, there's 112 references to the word blessed or blessing. And think about how God puts people in those spots. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are you who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are you when others revile and persecute you. That doesn't sound like you're getting a pile of good stuff, does it? But it means that you're exactly where God wants you to be, teaching you to be patient and waiting on Him. Blessed are those who hear the word of God and keep it. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven. Blessed are those who are steadfast under trial. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's from Revelations. And there is no hint of material prosperity or perfect circumstances in any New Testament reference. None. Being blessed means that God is with you. And God is showing you exactly who you are supposed to be and where you are supposed to be. And He is going to use you. So what is blessing? What I understand is that God gives us blessing to make us fully satisfied in Him. Not in stuff, but in Him. And anything that draws us closer to Jesus is a blessing. And anything that helps us to relinquish or let go of our temporal stuff is a blessing. And pain and loss transform us. And sometimes they unravel us. And sometimes they can push us to a deeper life with God than we ever thought possible. They make us rest in God alone, not in what we can do or what we can achieve. In pain and loss, we long for presence. We need God with us in the boat. Jesus was with them in the boat, and He calmed the winds and the waves, and He challenged them in their faith. I learned more to this too, because when I looked at this again, I saw that the trees that were prospering were transplanted trees. They weren't in the desert anymore. They were transplanted trees. So who does the transplanting? God does. So God is at work in your life, and He's producing fruit in you because you've been transplanted. I think you have to be transformed in order to be transplanted. I think God has to change your life inside out before you're ever going to produce fruit. And so sometimes when people say, I just don't understand, I wait with them and I listen to them so they don't withdraw, so they don't complain, so they don't say that nobody was ever there, so that they can recognize Jesus in the boat. And then we can understand what happiness is. Happiness is walking well with God. And so I already told my son this, and I told Sarah this, so that I could not have to pay them $25. And I already told Angel I was going to say this, but this is what happy means. This is what blessed means. Because usually when I use a person as an illustration, I tell them I owe them $25. But I already told you, so you're out of luck. Happy, blessed, is walking well with God. The memory I have most clearly in my head, because I've got a little pea head, is dancing at Mickey and Sarah's wedding with Ariel and Izzy and Marcy, and I'm making a big circle to the song Happy by Pharrell. And no, I don't agree with his theology, I don't agree with that, but you know what? I was happy. And we were dancing and we were laughing and we were so happy. And I think I was even crying. Don't tell anybody, but I was crying because I was so happy because we were in the exact place that God wanted us to be, doing the exact thing that God wanted us to do. And that's what blessing means. It doesn't mean you have a whole bunch of stuff, because I know they went out of there with tons of stuff. They're happy anyway. Not because of the wedding presents that they got, but because of the wedding presents that they got. And that's what happy means. So can you be happy when there's a big storm in your boat? Can you be happy even though everything's falling apart and everything doesn't look right? I believe that Jesus arrives for people to save them. And so that's the next half. So this first half wasn't so great. And, oops, there it goes. And then the second half of the journey, Jesus went on purpose for one guy. For one guy. And he was an isolated guy. And he was a guy that had evil stuff happen to him. That's okay, we can go on. Verse 5, in chapter 5, verse 1. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. Then Jesus got out of the boat, and a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. That must have been really scary to everybody else. That's not in the Bible, that's just my words. Because evil stuff hurts and scares people. And verse 3 says, this man lived in the tombs and no one could bind him in any way, not even a chain, for he had been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons with his feet, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. He had a lot of fear. And go back to that other part where we were talking. Isolation from other people happens when we're afraid. Being misunderstood and being captured and separated, that was a bad thing. He was placed out where the tombs, out where demons lived, and his pain caused him to self-inflict wounds. And he saw Jesus and fell down at his knees. And his response was that someone could finally help him. And his posture showed it. So verse 6 says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees. He shouted at the top of his voice, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me. For Jesus had said to him, come out of this man, you impure spirit. Then Jesus asked him, what is your name? See, this is not going to be a time we're going to talk about demonology and all that stuff. I just want you to know that the demons were never in control of this situation. Jesus always was. And God can do whatever he pleases. And he took them out because he had a plan for the demons. And because Jesus can deal with evil. My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. And he begged Jesus again and again not to send him out of the area. And a large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. And the demons begged Jesus, send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them. And I have to tell you this because we do have problems once in a while. And not every problem is a demon. Not under every rock, not under everything. But there's always a plan. And God will always take what is evil and turn it into good. Because he's in charge. A wise man once said that the demons and Satan are like dogs on a chain. They will run and they will bark and they will appear very, very vicious until they get to the end of their chain and there will be no further movement. They get to the end and they bark and they're harmless. Because God is the one who holds the chain. So as we look at this, I see all these things. I see the problem with the power that was in the storm, and I see the problem with what was going on, and I see all these things around him. But you know what I do? I feel bad for the piglets. I really do. Because he gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs, and the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down a steep bank and into the lakeside and were drowned. And those tending the pigs ran off and reported in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by a legion of demons sitting there dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people that it happened to the demon-possessed man and told them all about the pigs as well. And then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. Because he was too powerful. That's why they didn't want Jesus around. See, I think you have to have this idea in your head that the demons are bad and pigs are good. It's not a problem. It's what happens. The freedman was sitting calm, just like the ocean, just like the water in the Sea of Galilee. So we come back to the first thing. Who is this man? Who is Jesus? In verse 18, Jesus was getting back into the boat, and the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. And Jesus didn't let him. But he said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. See, I really think that the man wanted to be with Jesus. He would have gone anywhere with Jesus, but Jesus said, stay here. Now that you have seen the power, you're on a mission and you have a message. Jesus is more powerful than anything else. And so we are often in that same situation. We get scared by the storms. We get scared by the evil stuff around us. We forget that we are supposed to be happy or blessed by being dead center in the will of God. Because that's the best place to be. And Jesus has said to us, in effect, too, stay where you are. Tell everybody you know. Tell them that this power that is in me is now in you, and you can tell everybody about Jesus. Because Jesus amazes people with his power. And fear can be turned around, and isolation can be turned around, and misunderstanding can be turned around because of what Jesus has done. So we're going to celebrate that now. When we come to communion, we celebrate what God has done. We celebrate because of his brokenness and his bloodshed, so that we can be free. You can trust Jesus, even in storms. So that if you will go away with one thing, even on this beautiful day where it's not going to change at all, trust Jesus, even when it storms. So as the men come, you have the opportunity to pray and to ask God to move you today.